And we're back. Welcome back to STR Intel Podcast. I'm here with Evan Wilburn, Killian Gordon, my co-host again. My name is Phil Wilburn. And today we're going to be talking about key indicators to track your peak listing performance. Is your listing performing well? How do you know? What's up, guys? What's going on? Where are you guys at?
Hey, we're here at a new home of ours, actually. This home is a 3-bedroom townhome. Kind of on the luxury side, and it's actually not even on any of the OTAs yet. It's about to be pushed live here towards the end of the day, so we got to sneak in and do a little extra marketing for it.
Absolutely. It's always good to get that initial marketing boost when you first put on a listing. So we'll be pushing it out through our marketing channels, probably run some Facebook ads, some Google ads behind it. That's kind of what we do when we first bring on a listing, just to give it that initial boost. And then we'll typically do that sporadically throughout its lifetime.
Yeah, and it's coming on here in kind of the peak season, at least for Colorado Springs, the travel industry as a whole, but it's coming on here in the peak season for Colorado Springs. And so it's going to see a great second half of the summer and early to late fall here.
Yeah.
What would you guys say are the special amenities there, or the highlights of the property?
I actually just walked in, so I have no idea. I've never even seen the house.
You know, that's a good question. This one doesn't have anything uber exciting like your pool tables, your hot tubs, or items like that. This is going to be a great home for your groups of 6 to 8 people, family, or multiple families, 2 or so families traveling together. You got your full kitchen, you got your air conditioning, you're right by some state parks, you're by a lake, which for Colorado Springs, if you can be within stone's throw of a lake, you're sitting pretty good. And Fort Carson, we have a huge military population here, and so we're stone's throw from Fort Carson, from National Forest, and from lakes. So I'd say for this home, wonderful inside, wonderful interior, but the appeal for this home is going to be the surrounding area. Location.
Well, so let's just do a scenario here. So we've got a new listing here. We've got it's about to go live. What do you think are the biggest KPIs, the biggest key performance indicators we should be tracking for this home to make sure it's successful throughout its lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for any and all, the review system, whatever platforms you're going to be on, that's going to be your long-term indicator of success. So you may not know right away until we get it live, till we start generating some bookings and getting some reviews in. We really won't know or get any of that guest feedback right away, but that is something we're going to be tracking, something we're going to be watching. And we can even we can dive into that a little more too if you want, and talk about what exactly with the reviews are you tracking? What are you looking for? What would determine a good rating score? And of course, this is going to be dependent on the platform, but we'll just say Airbnb because that's the biggest one. What are some of the things you guys would want to be looking for in reviews as this property goes live and we start getting that feedback?
Well, one approach we take is we track every review, but even whether it's positive or negative, we're going to track what did the guest actually say about the space. Because sometimes, it's hard to tell if guests are actually enjoying the space or not based on just a star rating. It's like, what did they actually say? And then they'll usually leave you pretty good feedback in the private feedback section. But it's constantly monitoring that and then taking corrective actions as you're getting that feedback. So it's like, hey, there could have been a window shade on the window in the bedroom because light was shining in on my face when I was sleeping or when I woke up in the morning. And it's like, if we can, for one, try to catch those issues before, but then continually respond to them, because you're never going to know unless you stay here for a very long time. You're never going to know what are the issues with this house. What do we need to know about this house that guests, it's a difficult task because usually you don't stay in the listing before you launch it.
No, right off the bat, when the listing gets started, I would encourage people to maybe look at the reviews as more as collecting information to start dialing down on things. And as those reviews grow and grow more, you're going to fine tune your home even better. The guest is always going to catch something that you didn't catch. It's almost inevitable. And for people doing it themselves and people who are handing their homes over to host these management services, rarely has the actual owner of the home even stayed in their own Airbnb. And it's quite incredible what you can catch right off the bat if you do stay in your own home before it even goes live.
Well, we've tried that before, right? I remember it's a place we called Cascade Cabin.
Cascade Cabin.
It's a large property. I mean, there's what can go wrong at that property, will go wrong. It's Murphy's
Yes.
Law there. And you stayed there for 2 nights, and how many issues do you think you found just by staying there?
Oh, we learned that if we wouldn't have been the first guest in that home, then the water heater would have gone out on the first guest that ever walked into that home.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just
Yeah,
ruined the
because
first day.
we spent, Gillian, we spent what, 2 nights there,
Yes.
2 days there really, and we were just sitting printing signs, making instructions for everything, and we just kept catching things, running into things, even something as simple as a door is sticking, and it may not be things that are detrimental to a guest stay, and it may end up being suggestions like, hey, you need a blender here, or little things to improve the property. But that was more so to catch any major issues, like you said, the water heater going out, right? The guest checks in, they don't have hot water, there's no stay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful 4-bedroom home with almost every amenity you can put in a short-term rental out in the mountains. So each
Yeah.
home's different. But going back to kind of the scenario of when the home first comes on board and what to maybe monitor, I also would factor in the season. So this home coming on board in the middle of the summer, maybe I would initially start with a higher than average nightly rate because I don't want to miss out on any of the peak season revenue by just trying to drop my nightly rate low in the beginning to try to get bookings. Depending on the season, your strategy on launch might be a little different as well.
Yeah, I mean, it could be totally different if you're starting in the winter. It's, you want to try to get as many reviews in there as possible so you can start building the listing brand for the summer
Exactly.
or for your busy season. But you started off high because, you're going to get reservations. So you need to start off high if you're starting a listing in the busy season.
Yeah, maybe would you touch on kind of what we have our revenue management specialist, Rachel, doing daily and weekly as far as some of the pricing indicators we're looking at?
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of go back to the review too, because you can tell a lot about the pricing off the review.
That's true.
So
the question of value.
The question of value, yeah. I mean, that's the big question we face in this industry. Every listing is going to be different when someone stays in it. And then everyone's perception of value is going to be different. But you can usually gauge what is the range of pricing this house should have based on its amenities, based on its size, based on its location. You can put it in a range of pricing. But if you let's say we start off pricing too high for this home, we start the pricing off too high for this home, but we know in the busy season people are probably still going to book it. But then when they get there, they're just not going to feel like they got the value for what they paid. And so that's, sometimes pricing isn't just about how much money you can get out of the place. It's about what is the perceived value of the guest getting there, because you don't want to start it off with really high pricing and then someone gets here and they're like, wait, this is what I paid for? I thought this was going to be a luxury resort.
You could even have some of the amenities of the home get changed with seasonality. If you've got a home where a large appeal of it is a backyard or whatnot, and it's the middle of winter, then that perceived value of the home is going to change from season to season even. And that's kind of, that balance between price and value of your home also kind of ties into the balance of what's a good occupancy for different parts of the season and what's that balance between a good nightly rate and a good occupancy.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. I was going to say on the reviews too, it may not be necessarily indicated. You may have all 5-star reviews, but a good thing to look at too are people being really short on their review responses. It's just a quick line. Had a great stay. Everything was fine. It was clean, and they're not really diving in and talking about their actual stay and the experience in the place, and they're not getting into detail. So that may be something to watch. Of course, some people are just going to leave 5-star review, quick, short line. But if you're seeing that generally throughout all of your reviews, no one's really leaving anything comprehensive about their stay, maybe there is something wrong and they just don't want to mention it. Or it could have, there's something that it could have, or it could be a better stay for them, better experience.
Yeah, because wouldn't you agree when someone really loves a place, let's say like our location, like Poe Manor, they always leave like a paragraph of like, hey, this is the most incredible place I ever stayed. Just basically building the listing up through their words. They're just, this place was incredible. And that's when, like they're leaving 5 stars, but they're also leaving a lot because they enjoyed that experience so much. They're willing to spend the time to leave you a great review.
And those people are very likely to come back and stay. If they're traveling in the same area, they're probably going to look to see if your place is available in that instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to the pricing aspect of it, if we see a listing has a lot of issues in the beginning, like, we just had one where it had a huge leak in the property and, maybe it wasn't decorated as quite as nice as it should have been. And you didn't have the right furniture in there. It just wasn't a great home. We just ended up dropping the price, even though we were still getting bookings at a high price, but we were just getting torn apart by the reviews. And it's like, okay, the perceived value here of what they're paying is just not, it's not worth it for them.
And that's also,
Yeah, in short term, you're going to make more money by booking at higher rates, but long term, you're going to lose tons of bookings and tons of revenue through just those bad reviews.
Well, Airbnb will even kick you off their platform after like
They'll shut
2
you
or 3
down.
bad reviews in a row. And that's like 3
Yeah,
stars or under.
They'll delist you for, I think it's 5 or 7 days,
Yep.
something like that. They'll completely take you off, and that's just an email to you.
Yep.
It's not like someone's calling you to talk to you about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just basically an algorithm on Airbnb that's going through and scanning for review metrics. And then if it hits a certain threshold, it automatically suspends your listing.
well, another
Yeah,
thing
and
to look at would be how much are you spending on repairs for your homes? Like, are you consistently having guests address an issue that you're putting a Band-Aid over, and instead of just solving the issue or paying that little extra to get the problem taken care of or to get the issue taken care of, it's becoming a prolonged issue, which when you're starting to deal with, several $100 a night reservations or just it's proportional to every home. When you start dealing with reservations, a lot of money can be lost very quickly, and it might not be immediate where it's immediate feedback where the guest left a bad review. It might be down the road where eventually you start losing bookings 6 months down the road because of things that weren't addressed properly from the beginning when they first arose.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, you can use the different subcategories on Airbnb or HomeAway because, guests are usually pretty accurate on that. Like, it's, what is it, location, communication, cleaning, check-in, and then isn't there a fourth, like overall maybe? But you can use those as key
I think
performance.
it's value.
Yeah,
I think
value.
it's
Yep.
Actual value.
Value. So you can use those as KPIs to see, okay, is my communication, do I need to modify my communication? Do I need to modify my check-in process because people tend to have a lot of trouble checking in? Or do I need to modify, the value part, usually people will be honest on the value.
That probably would be one of the purest points of reference to get a feel of where you're at. A lot of people will click through, communication, the kind of more objective ones pretty quickly, but I think they might hover a little bit more on asking themselves, did I get the value from the home that I was expecting?
And it's so subjective because one person might think it was the value they paid for and the next person might not.
Yes.
So you're trying to find that range of what you can charge, but also have the range of guests get the right value. And then sometimes you're just going to get people that leave bad reviews no matter what.
Well, and it's important we talk about things to watch on your short-term rental, but this isn't necessarily like you're watching these every single day and you're making knee-jerk reactions off of everything. It's watching it over time and keeping in mind that you should be looking at this year to year at least so that you capture all 3 seasons, you capture all sorts of different types of guests, etc. So right off the bat too, some things may happen and you have to respond to them. The guest will point them out, but that's not just don't make that a knee-jerk reaction where, my home isn't doing well because just one single person may have had a slight issue that you overlooked in the beginning. It's looking at that big picture and not the day-to-day and the month-to-month swings that are inevitable in this industry.
One example of that is, you can't always trust guest feedback. Like one guest left a bad review about a ping pong table not being there. And they went out and bought a ping pong table for the property and then expected us to refund them.
Phil had mentioned that earlier.
So it's like, some guests are just not going to give you great feedback, and you can't trust that. But I think the key indicator there is like, do you have multiple bad reviews in a row? Because like one bad review mixed in with like 10 or 50 good reviews is not a big deal. But if you've got like,
That's true.
3 or 5 bad reviews straight, maybe there's a few 5-4 stars sprinkled in, then you probably got a problem there.
Yeah, what's the general consensus across all the reviews? Because when a guest goes to book, they're not just going to look at one bad review. They're going to look at what's everyone been saying for the past 6 months on this property. Okay, there seems to be an issue with the plumbing here that several people have mentioned. They're going to reach out. They're going to ask about it, or maybe they won't even bother booking it because of that. But what's the overall consensus? And like you said, if there's just one bad review among a bunch of really good 5-star reviews, it's not going to kill you.
Don't stress over it.
Again, don't stress over it because it does happen. Someone they're having a bad day and they could just be venting. Maybe they had a great stay, but they're just venting.
Well, and Airbnb just changed their review policy on this, and they said, basically it has to be relevant to the house. And I think like one example is if they're complaining about a local restaurant and they're leaving a bad review because they had a bad experience at the local restaurant, that doesn't qualify. You can get that taken off of Airbnb.
That's good news.
Yeah. So, and like anything that isn't relevant to the actual listing itself, like
out of the scope of the house and the property itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is fair. Makes sense.
So what are some things as you guys got started and maybe even see now that are little hidden costs that you didn't always expect to stack up to where they are and that owners should maybe be keeping an eye on or maybe a key performance indicator that you wouldn't normally think about and that would pop up even with just that's unique to specific homes?
It really just depends on the home because like a new build, you're not going to, like, we just see this so much because we have a lot of homes that come on that are old, Victorian, 1900s,
yes,
early 19th century homes, and they seem to have a lot more issues, obviously. It's just, common sense that they would have more issues than a new build look like this. This seems like a pretty new build.
Yeah.
And so your strategy kind of has to be different on those. And that starts with like the expectations you're setting for the guests too. Like, hey, this is an older home, older Victorian. It's charming, but it's a great way to feel the culture of the city. Get some culture of the city, or go back in time and stay at this house.
But at the end of the day, it's 100-plus-year-old home, so
things are gonna happen.
That would be something for someone to determine when they're bringing a listing on. Is what's the age of the home and what's the how much maintenance are you going to have to do on this realistically? And sometimes that's hard to determine if you've never lived at the house and maybe it's just an investment property you bought. You don't really quite know these little issues that come up. I know we have quite a few that have they can have the plumbing issue where ends up having to be snaked out to the street. So somewhere between the house and the street, it's getting clogged and backed up, and a lot of times that's roots and things like that. So if that's something is going to be an issue, you can always get it snaked, but also there's chemicals you can use. I think it's called Root X, and those will keep those roots from growing back in your pipes for, I think it's guaranteed up to 6 or 12 months, something like that. But it's knowing things like that and anticipating little things like that are going to be important to keep those maintenance tasks down, because it's not just going to be the cost of repairing those items. It's going to be the hit that it takes on the guest experience that impacts your reviews. So that's all something for people to keep in mind.
Just from an investment standpoint, I think some people who are out there starting their short-term rental or running it themselves, they're looking at the booking websites, booking.com, VRBO, HomeAway, and they're comparing their home to other homes in the area. And they're comparing it to other 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes in the area, and they're saying, well, this one's doing this a night, or my friend who has a similar is also doing this. And it's sitting back to and objectively looking at the home that's about to be or is a short-term rental. And maybe that might change how you look at your investment a little bit. You may just have to factor more aside for the general maintenance costs of running that home, as opposed to the same size square footage and same 3-bedroom, 2-bath home down the street that just doesn't have those issues. And those issues don't appear with short-term rentals. You would still have that same issue in a long-term rental scenario. So it's also just being realistic with your property when you are going over your key performance indicators.
Yeah, I mean, so you probably should be tracking each review as it comes in, but don't do it religiously, because
it's just one metric to track.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily your all be all.
Yeah,
metric.
But I mean, you see some pitfalls there, right? Like people track it religiously, and then they kind of screws with their mental health, I think, a little bit.
I mean, maybe track it, and like if you're doing what we're doing, which is essentially mapping out the guest experience from start to finish and collecting this data religiously, you're doing it in real time. But maybe if you're just doing it yourself, and you want a little bit of the step away from it for your own mental health, maybe collect it in real time, but then review it at the end of the month or review it every 2 weeks. Don't just get caught up in every up and down review.
Yeah.
And that kind of ruins the fun of
it's kind of like the stock
home.
market. It's an emotional roller coaster if you track it day to day.
Yeah.
Or it can be.
And for those people who really want to dive into it and take it to another level, they can start focusing on the ratio between number of available nights that were actually booked and how much they're getting for each one of those nights. And you can start seeing a ratio of what's the true performance of my home.
Yeah, well, one big thing too is revenue, tracking your performance indicators on revenue, because usually when you put a listing up, that the second year is going to be better than the first year.
Yes.
Like almost 9 times out of 10, unless something catastrophic happens to that house, or the owner decides to stay there for 3 to 6 months, or something. Usually, and that's why people use a metric called RevPAN in the industry. And RevPAN is basically, they use RevPAN and RevPAR. So RevPAN is basically the number of available nights divided by the nightly price, and then RevPAR is the number of total nights divided by the nightly rate. And so RevPAN is usually a better metric to track it, just because you have, in a vacation rental, it can be unavailable a lot of the days, or the owner might use it a lot of the days. So RevPAN just ends up being a better metric to track revenue performance.
Essentially a ratio between how much am I actually getting for each night that my home is actually available, not the overall, where that ratio is being diluted a little bit, where maybe the calendar is blocked off for a week, or you let family or friends stay in it for a couple of days. That would be factored out of there. You'd be seeing the true performance of your home, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a nice 40,000 foot view of, and that kind of answers the age old question too of, well, my property's doing fine. I have 100% occupancy all the time, but could I be making more money per reservation?
Yeah. I feel like we go back to that a lot.
How does occupancy weigh in on being in? Do you guys see that as a key indicator someone should be tracking, or what do you think as far as occupancy?
I think you should have a very, very close eye on it, and it's a key factor to track. But with seasonality involved, and depending on how many platforms you have your home on, you're going to be limited to a certain extent. And if you're solely focused on occupancy, then your price is reactive to what you want as occupancy, as opposed to your price being reactive to what the market is actually going to bring.
Yeah, I mean, in the hotel world, it's like, they want to find the sweet spot with occupancy and nightly price at 80% occupancy. That's usually like the sweet spot that most hotels are trying to get to. And that's kind of what we do too. It's, if we have let's say, what would 80% occupancy be? Probably 25 days a month.
Yeah.
That's around what you want to hit.
Yeah. And now, I mean, 80% occupancy for professionally managed short-term rental is probably the average. I mean, we're sitting...
Depending on the market.
Yeah, depending on the market. I mean, really, we're sitting at, what would you say, like 92 to 95% occupancy on average on our homes?
In the summer, yeah.
But I mean,
year round.
but that's not 100%, right? Because you know that if you just let your home get filled up, drop your nightly rate down to whatever it takes to get your home filled up at 100%, you're either losing money or you're putting excess wear and tear on the home, or just using excess resources to pick up what might not be worth it in difference of 2 or 3% occupancy.
Usually when we try to pick up the extra days at a super low price, we end up like either getting someone that's going to do legal activity in the home, or they throw parties. So, we've talked about this before, but pricing is a good screening tool.
And trouble guests, I mean, guest reviews are one thing, but also trouble guest would be a good thing to keep an eye on. Tracking, how many trouble guests are you having? And if you're doing this yourself, even maybe try to model what that guest is, so then you can be proactive in the future, trying to weed those people out. So if you're continuously getting bad guests, obviously, I would keep an eye on that, because maybe you're just giving away your home for too low of a nightly rate.
That's a great point. That's a great KPI to track, is how happy are your neighbors and how well is your home being taken care of by these guests. And
I hope, if folks could get anything from this podcast, it's that, hey, there's a little bit more to it that you can track and keep an eye on, other than just what's my occupancy or what am I getting as a nightly rate. Like, should I have my home set for 200 or should I have it set for 210? There's a lot of other things that you could be looking at that are going to tell you where you stand in the market as a short-term rental.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's talk about that a little bit more as far as revenue. I mean, let's say someone has a listing and their occupancy is good and they're making what they deem is a lot of money. How do they determine if their listing's actually performing well financially? What would be some tools people could use to find that information?
Well, you could use dynamic pricing, or if you don't want to pay for an outside tool or a third party, you could, one of the strategies we use is to inch pricing up and kind of see what is the ceiling here. So you start inching your price up. Are you still getting bookings? And you kind of find the point at which, you're hitting the right occupancy and you're hitting the amount of bookings you want. And you may accidentally go over that ceiling and you stop getting reservations. But that's why a good revenue management strategy comes into play. You're always trying to find that new ceiling, and that it changes every year too. So
I think being a student of the industry, and if you're doing your own pricing and sitting down and adjusting it, and you're trying to track all these, just be objective about it, and also be honest with how much time you're doing it as well. If you're deciding to continue doing it yourself, to do it, or to hand it over to management, I would also sit down and look at that. How much time am I actually doing it?
Yeah, and kind of going deeper, not just on pricing and occupancy, but a good KPI to track is, what is your yearly return on investment on this house? Are you meeting your objectives from when you bought the house? Because if you're not tracking your return on investment, then you don't know if you're even making money on the house. Like, you don't know what your income versus expenses. So you really want to track, what is your cash on cash return, which is, cash put in versus cash you get yearly. Your, how much is the home appreciating? What are you paying towards your principal? So you're tracking all these investment indicators to see what is your actual return on investment.
Yeah. So overall, there's a concept in accounting, which I stay the heck away from, but you have a general ledger in accounting, and that general ledger has everything basically at a 40,000 foot view. And then you have and that general ledger is composed of a lot of sub ledgers. And in the case of a short-term rental, your general ledger is going to be, what were my initial investment goals for this home? What were my cash on cash returns I was shooting for, et cetera, my equity, my cash flow. And then in that are all your little sub ledgers. One would be, how are my reviews doing? What's my RevPAR, RevPAN? How's my nightly rate versus my occupancy ratio? Did I mention reviews? How are my reviews?
Yeah.
What's the maintenance of my home costing me? And so all those are little sub ledgers in your general ledger of running your short-term rental to just kind of keep an eye on and always run checks and balances on.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. It's, you can sometimes the money and the accounting tells a story
Yes.
about how your business is running. So,
And when you talk about guest experience and value, you have that huge blend between the price and then perceived value. So that's a little bit harder ledger to keep, if you will.
yeah. Well, cool. Well, that's all the time we have. So what did we talk about? We talked about tracking your performance on reviews, but not being beholden to those reviews in such a way where it's, it's hurting your mental health. So tracking each little sub review category as well. So your value and your location, tracking all that little stuff and making changes as during the listing life cycle. We talked about revenue management, tracking your year-to-year pricing and occupancy for your busy season, your slow season, and making adjustments on that. And then we talked about, what else we talked about? Maintenance.
Yeah, hidden costs.
So hidden costs and maintenance, and that kind of goes back to your reviews. Your reviews are going to tell you the story of your maintenance. And then tracking your overall business performance as an investment. Is it performing on the cash on cash? Is it performing on your total ROI, your return on investment? So thanks for taking a listen, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.